Well, hey, we're going to jump into our brand new series, The Hope of the World. And I'm really, really excited about this series. I think this is an important series for us as a church to understand what we mean by the hope of the world. Now, you may hear that phrase and think, man, that's a pretty dramatic statement, the hope of the world. What is the hope of the world? And what I love about this statement is there's a pastor by the name of Bill Hybels who pastors a church, Willow Creek Community Church in the Chicagoland area. And around 1996, he made this pretty bold statement. And he said this, he said, I believe the local church is the hope of the world. I believe the local church is the hope of the world. And he expounded on this in 2002 in his book, Courageous Leadership. And I want to read for you his perspective on the local church. He said, there's nothing like the local church when it's working right. Its beauty is indescribable. Its power is breathtaking. Its potential is unlimited. It comforts the grieving and heals the broken in the context of community. It builds bridges to seekers and opens its arms to the forgotten, the downtrodden, and the disillusioned. It breaks the chains of addictions, frees the oppressed, and offers belonging to the marginalized in this world. The potential of the local church is almost more than I can grasp. And I love that idea that the local church is almost beyond what we can really grasp. The potential within every local community is beyond comprehension. You see, I think sometimes we sell ourselves short. You see, this idea, when I read that, when I think about the power of what can happen in the context of community, like that's why I started Icon Church. That's why I'm a part of this. That's why I love waking up in the morning. I get to be a part of this. Almost every time I pray, I thank God, God, thank you that I get to play this little role in this. Like, I don't know what's going to happen 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years from now, but what I know is when I'm long gone, when I'm dead and gone, Icon Church, the local church, will still be going. That's why I do this. Now, I don't know where you're at right now. You might be in this room and you might go, man, that sounds like a pretty bold statement, but honestly, I've been to a lot of churches, and that's not really my experience. The whole, welcome the downtrodden and the forgotten and the disillusioned, that wasn't really my experience. Maybe when you think about church, maybe when you're growing up or some churches you visited, when you think about what church is like, this is a little more what you expect.
The sermon today is on consistency and much more by biblical or application of these principles we can learn in process of consistency. Be consistency.
So now I know how to end a sermon that doesn't quite land. If ever you guys are sitting there and you're like, what is he talking about? And then you hear a bird screech, that's your cue just to kind of clap and oh, amen, that sort of thing. So maybe that is more what your experience is. And if you experience that for a while, man, if I were you, if that was me, I would probably end up feeling about church a little differently. When I thought about going to church in the morning, I don't know, I feel like this might be a little closer to my reaction.
I hate going. Why can I worship the Lord in my own way? My praying like hell on my catchment. Relax, those pious morons are too busy talking to their phony baloney God. How you doing? Peace be with you. Praise Jesus.
Oh, man. I'm sorry if it's sacrilegious. I love The Simpsons. And here's the thing. Unless you think we're going to watch Simpsons clips all day, we're not. I promise. I really have something legitimate to say. But the reason we laugh at this, here's the thing. The reason we love this satire is because honestly, it's on point a lot of times. It makes an extreme about what a lot of people feel on a regular basis. You look at this and we laugh and we chuckle and we're like, oh, I've been there before. And we think about this in a certain context because there's a truth that kind of rings through some of this. So when you think about that and you juxtapose that with the local church as the hope of the world, you might begin to think, man, is that Bill Hybels guy a little off? Is Dan just a little extreme about this? Like, we get it, like that's your thing, Dan, but man, really the hope of the world? I mean, there's a lot of people that's more their experience. I don't know about you, but have you ever woken up in the morning and it's Sunday and you're going, I really want to go to church this morning? You start thinking about who's speaking and you're like, it's probably just Dan again. It's not his hot wife or, that smart bald guy that talks sometimes, like I just got to put up with Dan, like maybe not. Or like your kids probably don't want to go, so you're like, hey, you guys want to go to church? I'm just trying to prioritize family today, you no? Okay, I'll watch some football because that's family, So you easily, as a pastor, can I be honest for a moment, just for a second? One of the Sundays I hate the most, like of all Sundays, is the Sunday directly following daylight savings. I'm just going to be honest right now. I don't know what it is about losing that hour. Like people sometimes convince themselves my clock didn't reset. I woke up an hour late, as if you don't use an iPhone or a smartphone that auto updates. You were kind of pretending like we're living in the era of hand winding our clocks, right? I mean, I get it, I understand, but it's it takes almost nothing for, you look outside and it's drizzling and you're like, it's raining. I might melt, and you're like, I don't know if or it's really cold out there. We probably shouldn't brave the winter storm, or it's too hot or too sunny, or God forbid, maybe even too nice of a day. Sometimes it almost for some people has to be this perfect storm of perfect conditions, and it's okay, I'll go to church, For a lot of people, that's their experience, and they're averse to it. They think, I don't know. So you think about this idea of, the local church is the hope of the world, you might begin to wonder, well, what part? In what way is the local church the hope of the world? If this is what so many people's experience is, then how can we look at a statement like that and say the local church is the hope of the world? See, I believe our problem is sometimes we're looking at things through the wrong lens. We don't have the right perspective on things. So to help you kind of get a little bit, to help us change our perspective, and I believe for those of you here, I'm quite literally probably preaching to the choir, except we don't have a choir. But you guys are the ones that are here, but I want you to help understand where some people are coming from and then the potential of the local church. Because as much as we kind of joke about sometimes feeling guilty about not coming to church, there's also a whole crowd of people that it's not even on their radar. Many of your coworkers, many of your family and your friends, the idea of church, and it at best is irrelevant. For some people, it's just a nice, neat tradition. But as far as showing up to church on Sunday, it's not even on their radar. It's not like their life is horrible and falling apart. They've got a decent job, their family's going on all right, and they just think, well, it's not even a part of, I don't even feel guilty about it because I don't even think about it. So for those people, and for the people that sure have been hurt, disillusioned, disenfranchised with the idea of church, how can it be the hope of the world? I want to tell you a story about a friend of mine named Amy. And Amy's a part of Icon Church. And her story might be different than yours, but I think it paints a picture well of what the local church can be. She grew up in a religious home that went to church on a regular basis, and she self-described herself as kind of the black sheep of the family. She didn't know about this whole Jesus thing. She was unsure of it. And because of that, her family thought, like you would, I suppose, that she was demon-possessed. Go figure. So not even kidding, there was times that her family would lock her into rooms and her uncle would come in and quote Bible verses and cast demons out of her and go. If you wouldn't realize, that kind of pushes you away from church a little bit, makes you think, I don't know about this whole Jesus thing. And naturally, that's what happened. And she didn't want to have anything to do with God. She didn't want to have anything to do with church. She didn't want to have anything to do with Christianity. As she grew up, she found herself in her young 20s seeking and looking for what's true and is there a God out there, and is there something more to life? And she had met a guy and they were dating and living together, and she found a church and they started going to this church. She thought, maybe I just had a bad experience and church is different. And they were going to church, and it wasn't too long that she joined a small group, and they invited her over for a special Bible study, small group. And she thought she was just coming to study the Bible, and when she showed up, she realized it was actually more of an intervention than anything else. And the leaders sat her down and explained not only, hey, listen, you shouldn't be living with this guy, but saying, but we also already arranged where you're going to live, and here's your apartment where you're going to live, and you need to move out on this day, and here's where you can move in, and already set up and arranged where they were going to live after that point, and said, hey, listen, here's the deal. This is the only way you're going to be accepted here. It's the only way you're going to be welcome here is if you do this and you do this now. And if you didn't realize, that, again, tends to turn someone off the church. And she said she realized that she wasn't welcome there. She wasn't really loved, that she wasn't really accepted, that she had to jump through all these hoops to get those things. And she, again, walked away from the church. And I wouldn't blame anyone for that to be the thing that caused them to walk away from the church for good, but I thank God that that wasn't the case for Amy. See, a few years later, she was in her late 20s and met this guy named Anthony. And Anthony was a part of Icon Church. And when she found out that he was a part of Icon Church, and not just a part of it, but a part of it from the very beginning days when we were meeting in a bar down on the square, because it was the only space that we could find. When she found out that he was a part of this church, she said, listen, I'll go, but was very standoffish, was very, thought that she would face the same thing that she had faced before. And when she came to Icon Church, she realized that these experiences in her past were not true of every church. And because of you guys in this room loving her, accepting her, welcoming her, she realized, man, church, maybe it is the hope of the world. Maybe it can be hope in my life. And she started becoming a part of Icon Church and fell in love with the church, and it was great. And her and Anthony got engaged. And then a few months later, she became pregnant. And all of a sudden, all the thoughts and the fears of what had happened before flooded back into her mind. She says, what are these people going to think? And what are they going to do? Are they going to reject me? And honestly, as I talked to her, she said all these things came back up. These rejection. Am I not going to be welcome? And she, for a while, quit coming to church just because she felt like she couldn't face people. And when she came, she felt love. She felt accepted. She felt embraced. See, because of you, you can show someone there can be hope. Listen, we're not going to turn you away because of choices that you've made or things you do or don't do. You're welcome here. You're welcome in this place. That's one of the reasons why I believe that the local church is the hope of the world, because it's a place where you're accepted, you're loved, and you're embraced in the midst of your shortcomings. You see, you don't have to behave before you belong. You don't have to believe before you can belong. You're welcome at Icon Church that you can belong, that you can just find community and love and acceptance, and we'll welcome you here. And we want the local church. We want this expression of the local church, because this is the part that we exist within, to be a place that loves people and accepts people and embraces people in the midst of their shortcomings. In the times they need it the most, that we don't sit there saying, I told you so. See, if you just would have listened. That we're there with open arms and we say, we love you and we'll accept you and we'll welcome you here. See, but this isn't the only reason why the local church is the hope of the world. There's another reason. See, when God created the institution of the church, when Jesus did that, when the Holy Spirit moved after Jesus rose from the dead and churches started springing up all over the place, the church realized there are needs that need to be met within our community. But I talked about this a few weeks ago when we talked about offering, first and foremost within our own gathering, that there are people in need here with us in this room, and we need to meet those needs. And the early church decided early on that we're going to be the kind of place that when one person experiences blessing and someone else is going through a difficult time, we're going to come together and support those needs. This was something radical and revolutionary in the early history of in this first century after Jesus had died. This is something that just wasn't happening. They started living in these communities that would care for each other and love each other and support each other's needs. And what I love is I've seen that happen within this church. I've seen people, even within the past few weeks, people coming up to me going, hey, listen, I just want to tell you there's this individual and I think they're going through difficult times. And I don't know what we can do as a church, and I don't know what I can do on my own, but I'm going to do everything in my power to help them out. There are times early on as a church, I remember there was one person that was a part of the kind of initial core team of the church before we ever had services. And they went through a season where they had like 3 or 4 flat tires in a row. Their engine went out on their car. I mean, it just seemed like when it rained, it poured, and just over and over and over. And I remember sitting there, and it was like 20 of us, and we said, listen, we can't do a ton, but we can pool our resources. And everyone gave a little bit and helped support and take care of his need. And I've seen that happen in this church. I've seen you guys wrap around a family in need, whether it's going through a difficult time financially or relationally, their family's going through a difficult time, and people rally together and hold that person up. See, sometimes I think about when I hear about someone going through a difficult time in life, and I think, man, what would you do without the church? Because for me, I've experienced it so many times, whether it be when Kelly has when she's pregnant and she gives birth and people come around and they're providing meals for us. Or there was a time that our youngest daughter was sick and in the hospital, and people came and took care of our kids and took them out and did things for them and brought meals to us and provided for us. And I just think, man, without the church, what would we do in those instances? See, the local church not only is a place where you're accepted and loved and embraced in the midst of your shortcomings, but it's also a place where you can find community when you're in need. When you're experiencing need, the local church can be a place to wrap around that and bring community and come together. And we've seen this happen time after time. Over the past year in 2015, it was a difficult time for San Marcos. We were hit with floods, not just once, but twice. It's crazy how 500-year floods happen in the same time. So we hit with 2 of those in one calendar year. What was it that came and rallied? Sure, the community, and sure, FEMA, and sure, but without the local church, I sat in meetings where churches from across the city came together, and we said, together, what can we do, the church? We watched organizations and individuals rally together, people from our own church leading the way and helping care for people's needs. See, the reason I believe the local church can be the hope of the world is because we're community when someone's in need. Let me just say this. If you're in this place, if you're here at Icon Church and you heard what Steve said, we mean that. If you find yourself in a place of need, let us know. And we can't do everything, but we can always do something. Whether that's just pray with you or rally around or come and support in any kind. And we want to be the church. We want to be this for you. You see, but these aren't the only things that the church does. And these are real practical needs that are met, and these are real practical things that we can do, but it goes beyond this. You see, what I love about the church and what I love about what God intended is we can be a place that you can belong before you believe and before you behave, that we can be a place that will accept you and let you come as you are. The thing is, we love you enough that we want you to not just stay there. We want you to move forward in your life, and what we believe is we take Jesus real seriously. We believe that the way of Jesus is the best possible way to live, that Jesus said that he's the hope. He came to bring life and bring it to its fullest, bring abundant life. See, we believe that the local church is a place, I'm going to put this up there, where you can be discipled. Now this word discipled, I get it. This is kind of a churchy word. When you hear where you're discipled, you might think like, oh, what does that mean? Like, what do you mean by discipled? I don't know if you grew up in the church in the 80s or 90s, maybe you think of Sunday school. How many of you guys went to Sunday school growing up? Absolutely. And the flannel graphs that you had and, the big fish and all that stuff. If you missed out on that, you didn't miss much. But you think of discipleship, and back in the 80s and 90s, it was called, I don't know if anybody remembers this, the discipleship hour. That's what, kind of the hour before church when you went to Sunday school, it was called the discipleship hour. And it's kind of funny that was the words that were used for that, but that's just kind of what they called it. See, for me, I don't think of discipleship so much when I think about that kind of churchy word as Sunday school. I think of another thing. I think of a lot of times like a Christian mentor, someone that's further down the road than me, getting together with me, talking to me about life and that sort of thing, and helping me figure out how to best live for Jesus. That's what I think about when I think about discipleship, but I want to boil it down in simple terms. There's a book called The Cost of Discipleship by a guy named Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Incredible book, just amazing, amazing book. And he was pretty bold when he talked about this idea of discipleship. And here's what he said about discipleship. He said, Christianity without discipleship is always Christianity without Christ. It's a pretty bold statement to say. He's basically equating the Christian walk with discipleship. You can't have Christianity without discipleship. What discipleship is it's what Jesus modeled with his 12 disciples, his followers. They learned to become more like Jesus. So at Icon Church, we thought about how can we boil down this term discipleship? Like, how do we can put that in kind of a modern vernacular? Well, it was Dietrich Bonhoeffer that tied it to Christianity. He said, listen, discipleship is basically just Christianity. So then the question is, then what does it mean to be a Christian? What does that mean? What is Christianity? And we sum it up like this, that being a Christian just means becoming more like Jesus. That's what it means. That being a Christian equals becoming more like Jesus. That's why here at Icon Church, our mission is to help people become more like Jesus. That's our goal. That we believe the way of Jesus is the best possible way to live. And I've had people ask me, like, what do you mean by, becoming more like Jesus? What do you mean by it's the best possible way to live? What do you mean by that? Do you mean that like life's going to go perfect and everything's going to be rosy? And no, not at all. What I mean by that is that I believe if you look at Jesus, the way he lived, the way he interacted, the way he communed with God, that the way he lived his life will bring you value, will bring you fulfillment like nothing else ever will. It will bring meaning and purpose to your life that no money, that no job, that no career, that no family, no love can ever bring. And it gives you that meaning and that fulfillment and that purpose, and it gives us life beyond this life. See, that's why I believe that it's so important. But you see, I believe all this because I believe that Jesus is the Son of God, and I have some real strong beliefs about that, but I also believe that the way of Jesus is the best possible way to live because I also think there's some practical stuff in the teachings of Jesus that's helpful. That's why I believe that the way of Jesus, if you look at his teachings and you follow those things, that you'll end up being a better worker, a better employer, a better father, a better mother, a better husband and wife, son and daughter. That's why we believe that if you come here to Icon Church and you're unsure about this whole Jesus thing, that he's the Son of God, we say, hey, you're welcome. That's fine, come. We want to show you what it means to live for Jesus, and just try this. This week, try doing this and see if it doesn't help your life. See if it doesn't help your relationships. See if it doesn't help things at work with your family. Just try it and see what happens. Because we believe that the way of Jesus is the best possible way to live. And we want to help you become more like Jesus. We want to help disciple you. That is why we believe that the local church is the hope of the world, because that's the context in which discipleship happens. But see, it's not just for you. It's bigger than that too. See, I believe the local church is also where your children are being discipled. Now, I get it that this only applies to those of us with kids. So for the rest of you, just hold on, because I believe that someday most of you will probably end up having kids. So this is going to be important to you. So again, this whole discipled, become more like Jesus. Well, what does it mean for my kid to become more like Jesus? How about this? What if your kid at home starts becoming more generous with their brother or sister? A little more gracious, a little bit more merciful. One way it affected me in my life is in junior high and high school, I decided as I watched my friends kind of go one way and start to party and do all these things that negatively affected their life, I decided in junior high and high school, listen, am I going to do this whole Jesus thing because it's just my parents' thing? Or am I going to choose to follow Jesus for myself? And how that affected my life as a child is I was able to avoid a lot of regret that a lot of people experienced, a lot of regret that my parents experienced in life because they helped raise me in the church. And I saw a value right then, not just a value someday when I become an adult, like church will be important. No, our kids that are in church right now, they're not the church of someday, they're the church of today. They can have an impact at their schools right now. What if your child learns to be gracious and they see the kids sitting by themselves and they begin to invite them to their table? They go sit with them. They love them and accept them and help them see that, listen, there can be community for them too, the downtrodden and the disillusioned. See, this is the church. This is the place where you can bring your children. We can reinforce those values that you're teaching. I mean, forever, parents will be the biggest influence on their own kids. But I know as a parent, me saying something gets so far with my kids. But if that can be reinforced by another adult or teenager that they look up to, and they're saying the same things and they're reinforcing the same things that I'm saying at home, that impact is exponential. You see, not only is this just kids' church for them, and it's just like this for them over there in the gyms or wherever, we cater the content for right where they're at. And that's why we think it's so important to have your kids in kids' church. Because listen, this to them probably feels a whole lot like constancy. We're going to talk about it's bored. It's not on their level, but over there, they're getting content made just for them and environments created just for them to engage them. When you don't come to church, it's not just you that miss out, it's your kids that miss out. They're the ones that aren't getting this environment. And you might say, well, I'll put a worship CD on for me, or I'll listen to the podcast this week, but where else do your children get that kind of environment? Yeah, you might be able to listen to a teaching, and yeah, you might be able to put on a worship CD, but in no other environment are your kids going to get the kind of experience that they can get in the local church. And that's another reason why we believe that the local church is the hope of the world. And lastly, the local church is where you connect with God. I mean, this is a place where we can connect with Him. This is why we sing songs. This is why we take communion together. This is why we give in the offering. This is why we do all these things, because it's ways that we can connect with God. And are there other ways to connect with God? Sure, absolutely. There are plenty of ways. But here, there's something about coming together in community. There's something about standing together, shoulder to shoulder with people you know well, and maybe some people that are complete strangers, saying we're going to take this time to focus our attentions on the creator of the universe, the one that made everything. You see, when you worship God, you're connecting with something that transcends ages, that has been around from the beginning of time, something that is just unfathomable. And you get to connect with that God in a personal way. And that's why we worship in church. See, the church just isn't something that's important here on a Sunday morning. Through the ages, the church has probably had the biggest impact on community than anything ever before. In the 4th century AD, the church was the first institution that created the very first hospital to care for people who couldn't care for themselves. It was the church that started the idea of health care, of caring for the sick and the elderly. The church was the first one to raise up children's rights and say, listen, children have value and we need to pay attention. They were the first institution to create the very first and largest orphanage. So we need to care for children who don't have mothers and fathers. It was the church that early on cared for the widows and the children. They led the way in that. In America, the first 100 out of the first 110 universities were created as Christian centers of education. Schools like Harvard, Yale, and schools that we look to now as some of the greatest ones were initially created as Christian institutions. Some of the greatest art, some of the greatest literature, some of the greatest music and architecture was created and influenced by the church. See, that's why I believe that the local church is the hope of the world. And I love this graphic. I love what Andrew, our designer, did with this, because you look at this little church, you look at this building in the middle of nowhere, and you think, oh man, that can't have an impact on the world. At church, a gathering group of people like this, meeting in an auditorium like this, I mean, surely they're not going to have any kind of real impact in a community. What I'd like to point our attention to is the fact that the local church is the place you're loved, you're accepted, you're embraced in the midst of your shortcomings. That when the local church is a place that you can find community when you're in need, when the local church is a place that you can be challenged to become more like Jesus, and where your children are being discipled, and where you can connect with God, you know what I'd like to say? I'd like to say, no, it absolutely is the hope of the world. Because we're not a part of some religion, we're not a part of just some gathering, some group of people, we're a part of something much bigger than that. We're the hope of the world. We get to be a part of that. And that's why coming here together is so important. That's why gathering is so important, so we can be challenged to become more like Jesus. That we can be challenged because we realize, man, I don't do this real well. When I see someone walk in that looks different than me, this isn't my first reaction. Man, I got to do that more. And when you do that for that one person, when you do that for Amy, her life changes. See, what I love about her story is when she was loved and accepted, she didn't just stay there. I talked to her this week and she said, Dan, you wouldn't believe it. I feel like I constantly want to learn more about Jesus. I started reading the Bible. I got this Bible study and I start putting on worship music everywhere I go. And I feel like I'm growing so much. I'm understanding more and more about God. Just because some of you welcomed her in a time of need. There are people in this church now that wouldn't be here unless there was community that helped them when they were in need. Single moms that couldn't pay the bills, that this church stepped up and helped them out, and they're a part of this church because of that. Their world changed forever because of that. And all of us, as we become more like Jesus, as our kids become more like Jesus, we can expand this thing. I want to encourage you to change your perspective that church isn't just a place you show up at once a week. You see, the reason you can't disassociate yourself from the church as a Christian is the Bible says that the church, that very first kind of Greek word that was used to describe what the church is, what it really means is a called out people. It's you. You're the church. I'm the church. And everywhere we go, that's the church going out into these places. There are people that you can reach that I never could, that you work with, your family, your friends, the people that you're connected to. It's not my job, the pastor, to reach them. What my job is the people in my life, the Jims, the Bridgets, the Heaths, the Kirks. Those are the people in my life. I get to be the church for them. You get to be the church in your own world. And as we do that, as we do these things in our own spheres of influence, that's why we can be the hope of the world. That's why this movement was started 2,000 years ago and is strong as ever. Through all of our failings as a church, it continues to move on. So I want to challenge you, change your perspective. Change the lens with which you look at the church, so it's not just some place you show up at once a week to kind of check the box. I showed up, I was at church, I'm good this week. But know that that you're a part of it. And everywhere you go, the church goes, because you are the church. And I want to challenge you one more thing, to bring people here, to bring people with you, to invite people to come on Sunday morning. Why? Not to be a part of something, not to check a box, not to join some religion or some gathering, that they get to experience the hope of the world. That they get to experience, wow, this isn't just one anomaly, this one Christian that I know that they actually happen to be a nice, loving person, but there's a lot of them. Maybe what I've experienced is wrong. And like Amy, they too can experience the hope of the world. Amen? I'm going to close in prayer, and when I'm done praying, I'd ask that we stand up and sing one final song together. And like Benji talked about, declaring what we're a part of and why we do this. God, we thank you so much that we get to be a part of this movement, the local church. God, and the reason we get to be a part of it is because we are the local church. God, I thank you for every single person here. God, for the role that they've played here at Icon Church. Now, they might look at it and think, man, I've just been coming for a little bit, or I feel like I haven't done as much. God, that they can be a part of something bigger than themselves. When they go to work, when they go home, when they're with their families. God, I thank you that I get to be a part of your church. God, I thank you that this is the hope of the world, that we can be a place that loves people, accepts people, embraces people in the midst of their shortcomings. That we can be community when people are in need. That through your church, that we can be challenged to become more like your son, Jesus. That our kids can find out what it means for them in their worlds to be more like Jesus. And lastly, that it can be a place that we can connect with you. We can sing songs together. We can take communion. That we can worship you. We thank you for your church. And everyone said,